Hello everyone, Ending Credits here, with something very special I want to show to everyone. In my last video, I showed off a one-dimensional shulker farm which used a bank of additional shulkers to supercharge the breeding cell and increase the rates to over 1,000 shells an hour. However, in that video, I hinted that this was just a pittance compared to what can be done using portals. This monster is what I was referring to. This thing doesn't just double or triple the rates of my original shulker farm, but this thing spits out well over 10,000 shells an hour, all from a single portal cell. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to make one thing clear. This isn't my design. This farm, and a lot of that stuff I'm going to be showing off in this video, is actually by Dark. Our plan was originally that once the project was finished, Dark would feature the completed farm on his channel, and I would explain some of the mechanics on mine. However, Dark has now taken a step back from Minecraft, but he's very kindly agreed to let me show off the design to all of you. If you haven't already, please do go check out Dark's channel. He does an amazing contraptions, plus he has one of my favourite shulker farm designs. Also, please bear in mind that this isn't the complete farm design, it's just a prototype to show off what a single cell is capable of. If you want to use this farm in your survival world, you're going to have to design your own shulker grinding and restocking systems. Now, getting 10,000 shells an hour isn't as simple as strapping a supercharger to a portal-based shulker farm. Indeed, there's already a supercharged portal-based farm design by黑山大叔, which, while it gets great rates, doesn't even come close to 10,000 shells an hour. So, what's Dark's big secret? Well, the first part is armor stands. One consideration when designing any shulker farm, but particularly for supercharged shulker farms, is that we don't want the breeding shulker to get hit while it's closed, as shulkers can only duplicate while open, and any additional damage while it's closed increases the chance of a shulker teleporting away or dying. There are a number of different ways of doing this, such as using scaffolding as a one-way gating mechanism, or using trapdoors to manipulate bullet part finding, but these can take a long time to activate, slowing down the rate at which shulkers can get hit and duplicate. Another option, which I used in my previous farm design, is to offset the shulker from the bullet stream. This works reasonably well for a smaller number of bullets, but as we increase the number of shulkers in the supercharger, too many bullets make it through, and shulkers start dying before they can open. So, how can armor stands help here? Well, armor stands have the property that they destroy projectiles which hit them, but don't get damaged by them. By placing an armor stand in front of the shulker can only get hit when its hitbox extends past the armor stand, so it can only get hit while it's open. Dark's original design used the armor stand pushed up against a honey block like this. However, despite only being 1/16 of a block away from the edge, since shulkers open at a non-linear rate, it still takes about 1/5 of a second for them to open past the armor stand. While that may not sound like much, when you're farming shulkers at this speed, every little inefficiency matters. Fortunately, he later realised that by pushing an armor stand against a block directly, rather than pulling it with a piston, the shulker was still protected by the armor stand while closed. The difference here possibly has to do with rounding errors working in different directions depending on how the armor stand is pushed. As well as protecting the breeding shulker, armor stand can also be used to protect the supercharged shulker. By stacking up shulkers in minecarts and protecting them with armor stands, over 100 shulkers can be fit into this basic supercharger. So, armed with this newfound knowledge, we chucked this into a basic portal cell using this great compact breeding cell design that Dark rustled up, and set about seeing how high we could push the rates. The results were not that high. We were able to get just under 2,500 shells an hour using a basic setup. Now, this is still 5 times faster than most basic portal cells, but nowhere near what a supercharger should be capable of. It seemed like the limiting factor was how fast the shulkers could be aggroed. To increase the rates, we tried adding more and more snow golems, but no matter how many we added, this didn't seem to improve the rates. We're still not exactly sure why adding more golems didn't work. It appears to have to do with the fact that when new shulkers appear, after having duplicated, they initially sit upright before turning to the correct orientation on the next game tick. If it gets hit by a golem while it's still upright, it appears to not aggro properly, but it still retains the 10 game tick invulnerability period where it ignores further hits. Increasing the number of golems just increases the chance that the shulker will get hit while it's still upright. Regardless of exactly why this happens, we still needed a way to aggro the breeding shulker as quickly as possible, and so we set out to design a shulker aggro engine. Rather than aggroing the breeding shulker directly, instead, what if we use shulker aggro from other shulkers? In fact, the concept of a shulker aggro engine using social aggro isn't new. If you recall my video on shulker reactors, I showed a reactor design by HF147 which, rather than trying to aggro shulkers in the reactor directly, used social aggro from a golem shooting its central shulker. This works really well for reactors, as it can cover a large area. However, a big downside is that it's really slow, taking a whole 15 seconds per aggro cycle, due to having to wait for the shulker to de-aggro on the golem before it can be re-aggroed. While HF has also produced an updated faster design, this relies on moving the shulker away from the golem to quickly de-aggro it. This is still far too slow for our purposes. My idea was, instead of moving the shulker away from the golem each time, why not just keep it away from the golem in the first place? If we keep the shulker over 20 blocks away, it will instant de-aggro due to being too far away from the golem. However, social aggro still triggers upon the initial hit. Of course, the problem with this idea is that you somehow have to get the golem to hit the shulker from over 20 blocks away, and snow golems aren't exactly known for their accuracy. Furthermore, since shulkers still have an invulnerability period of half a second in between each hit, we need to use multiple shulkers and rotate the current shulker getting hit. My initial plan was to use a series of snowball status chambers, using entity separation to carefully time how often each shulker got hit. However, collecting and distributing snowballs is not easy. Of course, there are some more chaotic solutions, but more entities means more lag, which is not ideal. On the other hand, Dark came up with this. This black box represents a level of Minecraft engineering that I can only aspire to, but which Dark seems to be able to produce with amazing regularity. It combines numerous neat tricks to spit out snowballs with precise timings, while still being relatively simple and compact. Let's have a look in the insides. As pointed out by Volbla, snow golems actually aim a fixed distance below their target's eyeline. This is something I use in my farm to force the golem to hit the shulkers while aiming at the Endermite. However, Dark has really mastered the abuse of this fact. In this case, by placing the Endermite directly above the golem, will actually cause the golem to shoot downwards. However, even with the golem firing downwards, there's still some randomness to their aim. To counteract this, Dark uses a piston to push the snowball into the honey block the moment it's fired, cancelling its momentum. Of course, it's hard to push the snowball with the golem in the way, but Dark makes use of the fact that mobs in minecarts will spring back to their original position after being pushed. To sync up the timing of the golem and the piston, Dark used the trick based off some strange behaviour I noticed in my farm, where I noticed that the golems would eventually sync up due to their line of sight being periodically blocked whenever the shulker restopped. By opening the trapdoor simultaneously as the piston is pushed, the golem is only able to see the Endermite and shoot a snowball as the piston pushes. Fortunately, the golem cooldown time is exactly 20 game ticks, so by clocking the whole system at 20 game ticks and staggering the opening time of the trapdoors, the golems can be made to fire at exactly 2 game tick intervals with 10 golems. This also coincides nicely with the invulnerability cooldown of the shulkers, with 2 golems per shulker, giving perfect coverage. Finally, the whole thing is encased in this deep slate box to prevent any stray shulker bullets from causing havoc inside. Oh, and since this is NoobTech CMP, it's also useful for protecting against stray gas fireballs. And no, that's not a joke. To use the aggro engine to power the breeding cell, we need to position it so that the breeding shulker is within social aggro range of the aggro shulkers, as well as within 20 blocks of all the golems. In theory, a single aggro engine can be used to power multiple cells, though I'll leave it up to you guys to work out the best layout. Adding on the aggro engine to our previous design, the rates jumped from 2,500 shells an hour to 10,000 shells an hour, and frankly, I'm pretty sure the farm can get to almost 15,000 shells an hour with a bit of tuning. So, is this the next generation of shulker farming? Well, it's complicated. First of all, very few people really need this number of shells. Secondly, while it's certainly the most compact way of farming shulkers, for many truly large scale farms, the main limitation is typically server lag. For the rates it gets, this farm isn't that laggy. But when you consider the raw number of entities, which is over 100 shulkers and 100 minecarts, not to mention how many shulker bullets, considering you can get about 300 shells an hour with a typical porter-cell farm with a single golem, that's only 33 golems and 33 shulkers to get the same rates. Of course, we don't need to fill our supercharger with 100 shulkers each. We can try to do very rough estimates for the rates of the farm by estimating the chance of a bullet hitting a shulker every game tick. If we plot this on a graph, we see that while adding more shulkers to the supercharger does improve rates, there are diminishing returns the more shulker we add. Another option to adding more shulkers is to make our shulkers shoot faster. This might sound like a strange idea, but it turns out that when shulkers are initially aggroed, their initial bullet cooldown is much shorter than their normal bullet cooldown. This means that if we regularly aggro each shulker for a second at a time, which we can do by momentarily moving it out of range of its target, we can get it to shoot much faster than usual. However, the challenge here is that we need to position the shulkers a very precise distance away from their target. We can't even use the same system as before, as it can only be clocked at 20 game ticks, while we need to cycle aggro at a slightly longer than 20 game tick clock, as we have to move the shulker away and back again. One solution is to use a snowball status chamber and entity splitting to separate the snowballs one at a time at regular intervals, though there is an additional challenge that we need to control the bouncing of the snowballs, otherwise they will start at different heights and momentums and mess up the timing. Of course, instead of more bullets, we can also try and be more efficient with the bullets we use. With a stream of bullets with random timings, very often multiple bullets will hit the shulker in the same game tick, wasting those bullets. If instead we can carefully control the timings of the bullets to hit at regular intervals, we can use as few bullets as possible. Fortunately, shulker bullets have a strange property where, if they go into a different dimension as their target, they just lose all AI and react under gravity. My original plan was to keep no AI shulker bullets in status and use entity splitting to let them drop at regular intervals. However, unfortunately, no AI shulker bullets ignore a lot of Minecraft physics, which means that they can't be reliably entity separated, at least by conventional means. But they can be entity separated by some unconventional means. In particular, we can use the shulkers themselves to split out single bullets. This works as, when the first bullet hits the shulker immediately teleports away, meaning that all the subsequent bullets remain. However, bullet hits are only registered when the bullet passes into the shulker hitbox, so we need to keep the bullets bouncing in water column like so. Using this method, we don't need to worry so much about the timing of the bullets, and we can maintain a constant reserve of bullets. However, even with all the spaces that portal cells provide, there's always a chance that the shulker will fail to teleport, in which case the subsequent bullets will crash into it and get deleted. This isn't the end of the world, as it just means the farm will run a bit slower until the bullet reserves are replenished, but it does decrease the potential rates of the farm. So, I hope you had fun seeing what's possible with a single portal cell, and hopefully we'll see some refinement of the concept in the near future. There's also a lot of ways the concepts in this video can be applied to other shulker farm designs, so you can expect to see some upgrades and some older designs as well. Once again, let's give a big thanks to Dark for coming up with such an amazing design, and also for very kindly agreeing to let me show you all. And thanks to you for watching this video. It's a lot of work recording and editing these videos, but knowing that there's thousands of people out there enjoying them really makes it a lot easier. I still have a number of video ideas lined up for the near future, so stay tuned. And don't forget to like, share and